Good morning. This is Bob Clark with ACT-IAC, Evolving the Workforce Community of Interest, inviting or welcoming all of you to our monthly meeting this morning. We will be focusing on a panel discussion on one of the projects that this group is leading on talent as a service. I want to give a shout out. We've got several people here in the room at ICF in Washington, but I want to give a shout out to several of the organizations who are on the phone. Let me bring up my list. Let's see. That should be over here. Well, actually, what? I'm going to do this just because I have this trivia question, and I'm going to first offer this to folks in the room. As we're focusing on talent as a service this morning, one of the reasons that the current federal hiring process is as it is because of the merit system. And the trivia question is, which president who was assassinated, which president's assassination led to the formation of the merit protection system?
William McKinley.
Also obscure, but not that obscure. Another one of the presidents that you wondered.
Ooh.
You said obscure.
It wasn't Kennedy.
That would not have been my
first guess. It is James Garfield, who was assassinated by Charles Dutroux. And Charles Dutroux was someone who claimed that he had helped Garfield win the election, and the president owed him a patronage job. Wow. And succeeding Garfield, Chester Arthur, another president that you might not know what he did, but Chester Arthur presided over putting into place the merit protection or the merit system rules, which guide a lot of the current hiring process to which talent as a service is a response to.
Interesting.
So that's your trivia for today. Everybody get off.
It's a good thing grievances are handled differently these days.
At least all right. So that was to enable me to get to this screen, which allows me to welcome some of the folks in the room. We have representatives from Learning Tree International and from Monster Government Solutions. But on the phone, we have folks from organizations such as GSA, USAID, Department of Commerce, the Golden Key Group, Brilliant Corporation, I think I said GSA, OPM, Suntiva, Department of Transportation, Jefferson Consulting Group, Evans Incorporated, my alma mater, University of Virginia's on the phone.
Go Terps.
Go who? Somebody's supposed to say, and something about Michigan and something about Duke, but they're not on the phone. And Sutherland Government Solutions. So thanks to all of you for dialing in. And let me just cover a couple of things. I am leading the session today. Both our government and industry chairs are traveling, and our government vice chair had a conflict today. Dave Potts is our industry vice chair, and he's going to be leading today's discussion. So I'm going to just do a couple of overview kinds of things to bring you up to date. Let me just make sure, is there any chance that Terry Schaefer is available to speak at this point?
Hi, Bob. This is Terry. I actually just found a quiet spot just in case that question came up. So if you have any questions, let me know.
would you like to give just a really quick update on the data analytics project?
Absolutely. So we're in the thick of this project, and essentially this is looking at workforce mobility and employee relocation and how it supports agencies' talent management efforts. And so it's looking at the data that agencies should be able to help them quantify the return on investment. So agencies tend to have data on what the spend is, but they really don't understand the return on investment. So this is kind of a follow-on to the project last year on human capital analytics. And right now we are at the phase where we're interviewing private sector companies. Private sector companies tend to be more advanced in this area. So we're looking at what the private sector does, and then we're also looking at the data sets and what may be available within the government to be able to quantify it and look at metrics. So if anyone has any questions about the project, please feel free to reach out to me. And then if anyone has any private sector companies they know of who are doing a really good job in this area, let me know about those as well. That would be helpful. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much, Terry. We're going to be in just a moment hearing an extensive update on the Talent as a Service project. I'll also give you a quick update on a project that I'm leading, which is to build a workforce track at the Imagination 2018 conference that will be held in Philadelphia in October. The conference, formerly known as ELC, or Executive Leadership Conference, now known as Imagination, has multiple tracks, and for the first time, the human capital area is being recognized, and we're being asked to put 4 sessions together. So there are 4 sessions, and for each of you on the phone, there is access to a document that has these 4 sessions in it on the ACT-IAC website. If you do have access to the ACT-IAC website, just log in and look for the materials from today's session. If you don't, send an email to cfry@actiac.org and ask Carly to send you the materials, and she can do that. For those of you in the room, this document was at the back of the stack that I gave you, and I'll just call out the 4 sessions that we have. The first one is called Talent Management, putting the right person with the right preparation in the right seat at the right time. That session is being led by Andrew McCoy, who's here in the room. The second session is called Developing a Workforce for the 21st Century, and that is going to be, that's taken directly from the Presidential Management Agenda, CAP 3, and we'll be looking for speakers from OMB and other responsible agencies who are implementing that. Terry Schaefer, who just spoke to you and is with GSA, she's leading that track. The third track is called Organizational Learning, Training Success Stories, where training has made organizational performance impacts, and that is being led by Brian Green, also from Burning Tree International, and that will be focused on CLOs and other learning topics. And the last is Coming Impacts of Artificial Intelligence on the Government Workforce, and that's really a reprise of the session that we just did last month, but for a larger audience there. And Carrie Vandenberg from Jefferson Consulting Group will be leading that session. There's more information on each of those sessions that's in the document that was attached. Upcoming meetings of this community of interest. One that we have scheduled is the July meeting, which is a presentation on the new directions from OPM on the government workforce in 2019 presidential management agenda. OPM put out a workforce management report a couple of months ago, and the creator of that report is going to brief us on that. That session on July 12th will be teleconference only, so there will be no in-person meeting for that. We will not have an August meeting, and we will resume our meetings. The next in-person meeting will be September 13th. We have not yet worked out topics or speakers for that. We'll be getting that out to you. But July meeting, July 12th, no meeting in August, and then resume in September. The last organizational update I wanted to update you on is on the elections for open positions. And Dave Potts is rolling off as industry vice chair, and I'm pleased to announce that Andrew McCoy is going to be taking on the role of industry vice chair. It was hotly contested, as many elections are these days, and he was the one person nominated and in a hot contention with himself. And so congratulations, Andrew. Look forward to working with you in the coming year.
Great.
Those are all the announcements that I have. And so with that, I will introduce Dave Potts, who will introduce the other panelists on this important topic.
Great. Well, thanks, Bob, and thanks to everyone, and thanks for the folks on the phone as well that are attending. It's certainly an exciting time right now for not only this project, for a lot of things that are going on, in particular with the federal workforce. Before I get into kind of an overview of what we've been working on for the past year and a half, I'll just do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to let the co-hosts here with me do their own introductions as well. But as Bob said, I'm Dave Potts. My role today is Chief Talent Officer for DRT Strategies. I've been supporting various different, both federal as well as commercial and private organizations in human capital areas for around 23 years. It's a passion of mine. I love working with people. I love working with organizations and helping them transform. I have been very, very excited to lead this particular working group we've had over the past year and a half. Maria Rote is our project sponsor. She's the CIO for SBA. This project initially had started with the concept of getting folks, in particular in high-demand cyber and technical skills, into the workforce, and that was really the genesis of the project. So very happy to have a strong working group. Over the past year and a half, we've had, give or take, between 12 to 15 folks participate in the process. I've got a couple of them here in the room with me, but also some of you might be on the phone as well. So I'm Jennifer. I'm going to throw it over to you to do an introduction, and then over to Jody.
Great, thank you. So happy to be with you here today. I'm Jennifer Myers with the MITRE Corporation, where I am a principal and the Human Capital Strategy Capability Leader. So this is right up my alley. I've had a great time working with Dave, really appreciate his leadership through this, and also want to just acknowledge a lot of people back at MITRE who have really helped us on this effort. So first I want to thank our team member who couldn't be here today, Joe Jockall. And also we have the good fortune of a lot of human capital subject matter experts at MITRE who served as our advisory board. So I want to acknowledge Lisa Allen, Dan Ward, Vanessa Graff, and also Nick Lianzetta. And finally, also want to thank our leaders who supported this effort and enabled us to get in and do this research we don't often have time to do. So just want to thank Nancy Letzinger and Elaine Ward.
And I'm Jody Stemko, and I have been at MITRE almost have a one-year anniversary. I'm a principal focused on organizational change and human capital management. I've spent the last 24 years, maybe half a year. Okay. We crossed paths at Deloitte. I was also, and their federal human capital practice was also at the He Group. I'm working both with commercial and federal. I'm on a range of human capital issues. I spent a lot of time on doing work on employee engagement and how to help organizations be a best place to work, but also succession planning, competency modeling, and leadership development as well. So all areas. And it's been a really fun project for me, and I think it's really critical for the federal government to be able to really, I've worked with agencies like CDC and other agencies in helping them to identify key mission-critical gaps, and I think this is going to serve really well for a lot of federal agencies out there.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so again, just touching briefly here, we have had a wide array of different skill sets and expertise, both on the project team as well as from a subject matter expertise contribution standpoint. I'm not going to go through all the names here, but again, a lot of these folks have supported this process, not only in our recent CONOPS report that we're doing the preview on today, but also, again, through really the past year and a half. And it's just been really exciting to sit down with a lot of these folks and to do the brainstorming and the collaboration as well. When we started the project, it really was quite, I would say, a blue sky conversation. And with a lot of the constraints that we've had, in particular with the federal workforce, the one thing that I kind of charged the group with was not necessarily constraining our thoughts to current systems, and in particular really trying to think out of the box a bit on how the federal government can better attract and develop and retain a diverse workforce. And so based upon that seed, if you will, the project really took a lot of different directions, but ultimately, about 9 months ago, we published our Phase 1 document. That was a white paper we had done, and that was really a kind of I would call it a concept overview executive report. And that document detailed some of the thinking behind the project, really trying to cover the end-to-end employee life cycle. The working group on that did a really fantastic job of being creative and coming up with some new ideas that I think perhaps had been talked about in some cases before, but never necessarily applied into the federal government and the way that it attracts and identifies potential employees. We got a lot of great feedback, a lot of momentum around that report for some of the ideas that we were promoting, and that really concluded our Phase 1 of the project. From there, we rolled into our Phase 2, which was getting into the details of taking a lot of these great ideas and trying to get into the nuances of how to actually make this happen. And if you're familiar with the concept around concepts of operations, that is to take ideas and to make them much more tangible, to push forward and promote ideas of how this could actually work in the environment today. We had a working group of around 12 to 15 folks. Sometimes we met in person, sometimes we did it virtually, but we have gotten to the point where we are today, where the CONOPS, I would call it, in its final draft stages right now, and the hope and the desire is to have that out for publication through ACT-IAC by the end of this month. So it's going to go through a couple of other final reviews, and really excited about where that paper is going to go. So that's kind of the high-level overview on the project side. Jumping into a bit of talent as a service from an overview perspective, because some of you may not be necessarily familiar with the concept. Talent as a service is really designed to be a model and a guide for government to better identify and onboard personnel into mission-critical environments. The term talent as a service is a bit of a wordplay. I'm sure many of you are familiar with software as a service, and if you think about those concepts of having a centralized system in some cases that has the ability, if you will, to provide resources and solutions and services to people that use that software as a service. You can flip the same concept around and talk about it from a talent standpoint. And a lot of the concepts that we get into around having a centralized pool of talent that is available to be used out in agencies and departments. So we'll get into a little bit of the scheme of how that actually works, but we thought the wordplay, if you will, and the associations with providing talent as a service as it relates to software as a service was something that was really interesting and catchy, and we thought had a good amount of merit with that. The concept around this is really to streamline sourcing and recruiting and onboarding. Whereas the federal government takes a proactive approach to identify folks with the right skills, with the right competencies, and the knowledge and experience to bring them into a talent pool, and then to have those individuals prepared and ready for federal employment. The most novel concept around what we're proposing with talent as a service is that an individual who is in that talent pool does not have to leave their day job. They can remain in commercial or private employment. They can be part of this talent pool. And then if they desire and if it's a right fit, then they would move from the talent pool and be, quote unquote, dispersed into different agencies as well. So what we're trying to do and what we're proposing is to really push the proactive identification of sourcing and the recruiting of folks who are eligible for federal employment, who have a desire, possibly who have a desire to be part of that process, and then to get them into the talent pool to help grow and groom that talent and to get those individuals ready for federal employment, again, without having to, quote unquote, quit the day job. And that's a bit of a different concept from a holistic standpoint with the way that government does their sourcing and recruiting today. As you guys are probably very aware, most of the recruiting the federal government does is somewhat of a reactive process, right, where there are job postings that are put out, and really government is waiting for those resumes and interested folks who want to be part of that to submit into the process. So that's somewhat of a reactive process. Not all agencies do it that way. Some do have proactive programs, but this really kind of flips it on its end, because what we're doing now is pushing that sourcing recruiting way further out into the talent population, if you will. So that is the overall concept here. The next slide here talks about the overall schema. So again, what we want to do is we want to identify all different types of talent, part-time, full-time, temporary, surge, those who perhaps aren't necessarily ready today but could be future staff that have the potential to be part of that talent. We want to be proactive, and the concepts that we talk about are really finding and attracting those individuals into the talent pools. Once they're in those talent pools, we had also talked about how do we, one, maintain and grow that talent pool, and how do folks collaborate when they're in those pools? Are they part of program or mission-related areas? Are they part of broad communities of interest or other related teams? And some of the themes there are, again, we don't want folks to necessarily, they don't have to leave their current jobs, but we also want them to be with like-minded individuals as well. We want there to be learning and development and growth within those particular communities. So when the time is right, and perhaps there is a good match for that individual in that talent pool into the agency or the department, there's actually a seamless approach to that as well. So going back a little bit to our overall concept, when we first put out the executive report, we really focused on the end-to-end portion here. For the CONOPS itself, we really decided to focus just on the sourcing aspect of it and to get into some of the details of that. So I'm going to go into a few of our goals here. So as we looked at the CONOPS, we decided that in order to get into the details, we did have to get very focused on the front end of this piece. So our overall CONOPS goals were designed to provide the details for how the federal government tracks and sources the potential employees and candidates into public service roles. So again, including those individuals who are seeking part-time, full-time, or temporary work with the agencies and departments. The overall CONOPS and the pieces that we focused on would allow and enable the talent pool participants to move in and out of public sector as well as private employment, including candidates who are actively searching and those that may be passively interested. And I think that is one of the key focus areas for us as well is, again, for individuals who contemplate going into federal employment, most of the folks know what they're getting into. They know the cycles are going to be very long. They know in some cases, in particular for some of these mission critical roles and some of the technical roles, even though there's a lot of existing authorities today, for example, the process to actually get onboarded, to get the clearances, to get the entrance on duty can take months and months and months. In some cases, it can take over a year as well. That's a huge commitment for somebody that's passively interested in federal employment, and taking somewhat of that leap of faith is a bit of a stretch and a struggle for some. And therefore, what we don't have is we don't have individuals who are willing to take that step. They're like, you know what, I'd rather stay with a day job, I'd rather stay in my commercial job, and I'm just not going to commit to that. This, again, takes that concept and says, that's okay, you can keep that job, but at the same time, we're going to move you forward into these talent pools, we're going to ready you, and you don't have to necessarily leave that job. So that was the overall goal. That's what we focused on from a CONOPS perspective. In terms of the overall implementation strategy, what we wanted to do is we wanted to design something that was a scalable model, serving the interest of all interested federal agencies across the U.S. for multiple critical occupation series. Our overall focus was technical roles, and particularly those on the cyber side, roughly speaking falling into the 2210 category. But again, this concept can be applied to all mission-critical roles or any roles, frankly, in government that we've got gaps in. So to support this concept, we decided that it would be best if it were implemented in a phased approach. So we'll go into some of the details of that in a few minutes here. But that phased approach, having some very defined goals and milestones. We don't believe, and based on our conversations, that you can do something like this with what I would call the Big Bang approach, right? You can't just flip a switch and make these types of things happen. We think that if you have the phased approach and you're doing it in a very systematic way and using some existing flexibilities that are already within government, that again we'll go into in a few minutes here, that this could be something that is tangible. In the short term, in our concept, we've actually proposed a piloted initial proof of concept phase with a limited defined scope, and specifically we're going to talk about the focus for cyber/technical occupations, those individuals who would fall into GS levels 7 through 14 in non-supervisory roles. And also from a geographic standpoint, a focus in the Washington, D.C. and San Francisco metro area. So that is the overall focus for the pilot. And again, it's not necessarily limited to those particular occupations in perhaps future possible rollouts, but for right now, we've recommended in our CONOPS to start with something like that. Okay. So in terms of the overall implementation strategy, we also proposed that tasks would be managed by a PMO office in a particular executive agency, and right now we're recommending OPM for that. The construct and the operations based upon the existing PMO structure would also follow, in many cases, a lot of our HR, LOB structures in the way that the shared service centers tend to work. The PMO would consist of a small staff of civil service managers possessing the following competencies and skills. So for those managing this, got to have an understanding of analytics, systems, and IT. Certainly those who have familiarity as well as possibly some of the nuances around clearance and adjudication, the experience with that. Those who have experience with talent acquisition as well as recruiting. And those from a marketing and from an outreach standpoint as well. So that really started, in some cases, a lot of brainstorming and thinking with the group of how. So we've got some great ideas here, but how do we actually make that happen, and how do we provide these very tangible examples to take this concept and truly make it operational as well? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Jennifer, I believe. Are you okay?
I'm ready.
All right. And we're going to talk about the funding piece here.
Yeah. So and just transitioning into the operational and operationalizing this, you know, I've been doing this project with Dave now. I think we've been working on it over a year in the phase one. And it was a lot more fun to just reduce all the constraints and blue sky and reimagine and really brainstorm. And then we had to be a little more practical this time around. But this has been fun because, you know, working in the agency environment, we usually talk about the limitations and what we're not able to do. And so it's really been exciting to talk about what is the art of the possible and just to really find that there are things out there to leverage. So, you know, we're not talking about enacting a lot of new laws and regulations. There are things out there that are a good foundation. So we're trying to point to that as options. So getting into funding, there are some funding mechanisms that we would explore first. One, the revolving fund, which OPM uses quite heavily for a lot of their fee-for-service. And we think that that's a good, now what is incumbent upon this task organization is to deliver the business case of, you know, why do this versus what you're already doing. But we have talked about this isn't an either-or scenario. This is a supplement to what agencies are doing. So particularly for cybersecurity, it's just another option in the pie that agencies should try to be able to supplement their efforts because there's such a grave need, which is why we want to start with that. But you know, it is incumbent upon the organization for the agencies to get a return on their investment, to deliver people that they wouldn't normally be able to access. And one of my excitements, I am extremely happy at MITRE. I hope to retire there and post-retire, still work there. But this is the first time I've seen something and said, I would consider that. You know, I would tell you, I mean, I've spent my career in this. I would never post, I've never applied to anything on USA Jobs, but this is something I would explore. So I think it really would open us to a lot more people who could service the government. Finally, the Working Capital Fund. Again, this is something that the Federal Shared Services utilizes, and you know, even a branch off of that, the Franchise Fund, which is very similar to the Working Capital Fund, but especially since we imagine it to be very IT technically focused, would enable you to retain 4% of the earnings for investments in future years. Turning to policy, so you know, we always hear that 80% of the jobs are filled with 20% of the hiring authorities, and people are constantly going to Congress asking for new hiring authorities, but there are a lot that already exist. So again, we would start with what there is, and then if there need to be tweaks and adjustments, but we feel like there's a lot to start with. But before I get into any of that, just want to establish that anything that's done obviously has to be subject to civil service laws and regulations, and whatever is implemented needs to avoid adverse impact and discrimination in all processes to ensure there's a fair and open competition among those who are eligible for federal services. And so some of the current hiring authorities that we think are leverageable. So President's Management Fellows kept coming up among our human capital SMEs, you know, a very established program that's currently for management and leadership positions. And I found it very interesting that there is an initiative going on right now to actually transition senior, very seasoned private sector executives into limited term appointments. So we know that's already going on, but what it would shift is instead of a management and leadership track, it would be more for functional and technical. So we feel like that could be something that could be leveraged very well for that. Also, IPAs keep coming up, and in fact, I heard actually through our MITRE grapevine that this has been rebranded about, oh, that's the two-way IPA that I keep hearing about. So this would be, and I think especially in the earlier stages, we just saw this as tours of duty. This is a way that you could kind of rotate in and out of the government to try something, fill a temporary need without having a long career and so forth. Lots of other temporary term appointments, accepted service. There's also, we have a lot of veterans that would love to serve this country, that have applicable and transferable skills. So, just listed some of the authorities there, implemented the right way, could be another great source of talent for the government who are very mission focused. But I think some of this is, we see this as a supplement because this is for individuals who have a functional and technical skill that don't necessarily want to work for a specific agency or serve a certain mission versus agencies hiring people who are probably first committed to the mission and then functionally technically second. So we're kind of reversing that paradigm. All right, and at this point, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Jody to take us through the sourcing.
So how do we really make this happen? How do we roll this out? So we've tried to come up with some key steps that we think need to be taken to make this happen. The first task, which I think is a really critical task, is we have to identify and attract candidates into this pool. So not only identify those that might have the competencies and experience, but also how do we make them excited and want to be part of this? So there's 3 subtasks here, and I'll talk about each of them. First, conducting workforce planning. So we have to understand where the biggest needs are. We're starting with cybersecurity, but where are the biggest talent shortages? Where should we be focusing? We also have to understand, have a government-wide competency approach and understand what are the requirements for these mission-critical occupations that we're going to include in the talent pool. And finally, how do we identify individuals that match that, what we call talent profile, and attract them into the pool? So I'm going to start with workforce planning. So as a starting point, recommend reviewing the OPM, any OPM collected workforce planning data from agencies. Some agencies have been identified as having leading practices in workforce planning, looking to them. Agencies that maybe have done workforce planning for some of these critical occupations. And looking at data such as what are the retirement and percent of turnover. Also looking at time to fill a position and vacancy rates, and what are some of those competency gaps. Those should help us to identify triggers and say, okay, we're starting with cybersecurity, but this occupation seems to have a lot of competency gaps. There's 4 positions and there's talent to fill it, and we're competing with the private sector who has higher compensation, and this is one we may want to focus on getting people on board. So for the pilot, we mentioned that we're going to focus on cybersecurity, and there's a lot of reasons to focus on cybersecurity. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's more positions out there than talent to fill it. OPM, of course, in partnership with the Chico Council, has identified 6 mission-critical jobs, with cybersecurity being one of them. The President's Management Agenda 2 has a strong focus on IT modernization and attracting and recruiting and retaining talent to help modernize government. So that's another really great reason to focus on cybersecurity. As we roll this out to other occupations, examples might include math stats, engineers, STEM, which is also another OPM mission-critical job. So as we roll it out after our pilot is successful, then we will begin to identify other occupations where those talent shortages exist. The second piece of this is to create a consistent competency approach. So in order for us to go out and source talent and try to attract talent, we need to understand what talent we're looking for in the first place. So really need to identify some government-wide competencies or knowledge, skills, and abilities, and it includes experience in there, that are required for success in the mission-critical occupations that will be included in the pool. So cybersecurity is our first example. The reason we need to think government-wide is we're not bringing people into a pool for a specific position, but into a pool that could funnel to specific positions of agencies. So when an agency has a specific job opening they may customize or tailor that competency model. But from the beginning, to get people in the pool, we really do have to come up with some government-wide competencies. And we can leverage existing, OPM has its mosaic competencies, which identifies critical tasks, competencies for nearly 200 that are critical for success in nearly 200 occupations, cybersecurity being one of them. There's also a lot of federal agencies out there that have developed competency models for cybersecurity, STEM, and so forth, and also in the private sector. So basically, we will leverage these to develop talent profiles. A talent profile will be, for each critical occupation, what are the requirements? What are some of the knowledge, skills, and abilities or competencies required for success? What types of experience, credentials, education that might be required? So then we can use this to communicate out to the population that we're looking for these types of people. We can also leverage some advanced analytics where we might be able to review and begin to identify candidates through social media, like LinkedIn profiles, and also for assessing candidates for initial entry into it. I just want to reiterate my colleagues that, we will, any type of assessment used must be based on the job analysis, must be job relevant, so that we make sure that we're selecting people into the pool based on a valid process. Okay? So now that we have these people in, we understand who we want in our pool. Now we have to go out and do some proactive sourcing and attract people to enter that pool. So potential sources of candidates. So for cybersecurity, for our pilot, we're thinking starting with cybersecurity talent who have received a public trust clearance within the past 5 years. We know those people are cleared or could easily get a clearance. This could be federal contractors. It could be former feds, retirees. It could be existing ones that might want to move into other positions, veterans, as were mentioned earlier. Then, as we expand, we'll need to increase our sourcing and outreach. So, for example, there's a lot of research out there that shows that people are using social media to find out about job opportunities. Millennials, there was a recent study by the conference board, the executive board, that said that of millennials searching for STEM occupations, they're focusing on Facebook, LinkedIn, and 79% in another study of Americans are searching for jobs based on online. So we know social media is important. If we want to get people in, we can push information out, talk about the great things federal agencies are doing. We also want to promote the exciting and cutting-edge work being done by the federal government. Also partnerships at as early as high school, but the college, university level, to start getting people excited about federal work and excited about cybersecurity and other positions we may look at. Referrals is also a very effective process, so can we leverage our existing federal employees to help us identify folks to move into the talent pool. I mentioned that we're going to also do some advanced analytics to be able to look at social media and LinkedIn profiles and to help us say, here's the talent profile, and let's see if we can find some people that match that profile, and I think we're calling that match.gov, if I'm correct. Yes. And then we need to, I think, no pun intended, and then we need to create a federal brand. I think this is very important because we all know that some people out there are not even considering federal employment, and we want to make sure that we're targeting not just the people that would typically apply, but what about all those other folks that maybe have a bad taste in their mouth about federal employment and don't really understand the benefits of working for the federal government. So really trying to understand what's important to people. We know, for example, millennials and everybody want meaningful work, work-life balance, great benefits. We can highlight what the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is telling us, some of the positive things like employees really find their work important, sense of accomplishment, they have great work-life balance, they have a sense of mission. All those things we could be highlighting in our messaging to begin to attract individuals that want to come into this pool. And then we conduct the outreach activities. That could be a more broad-based outreach. It could be government exec. It could be radio. It could be many ways to just go out to the masses, but I also think we have to come up with ways to go to some more targeted. So if we identify people through social media or we identify a referral, how do we then go out and target those individuals to get them interested in the talent pool? So that's the first task of making this happen, is finding out what the needs are, finding out what the requirements for the job are, and getting people in that meet those requirements. The second task is, another very important, is how do we develop a process where candidates can self-select in and out of the pool? It has to be very fluid. People will be coming in and out throughout, yes.
Jody, let me just give you a quick piece of feedback. Ken Munson, OPM, is noting to let you know that OPM... Ken here.
Yes.
Just a piece of feedback from somebody who's online. Ken Munson at OPM wants you to know that OPM is looking for out-of-the-box thinking like Match.gov. There's an appetite for changing policy, procedures, and guidelines. So let's not let current processes put a box around us.
Awesome. Excellent.
Good.
We agree with that.
We agree.
We 100% agree with that. So that's great. Thank you. So how do we get people to come in and out of the pool? We need an easy process. So if a new person wants to go in, they need to be able to have a user-friendly way to create their individual profile. And so what about me as an individual makes me qualified for this type of position? What's my education, experience, and so forth? So it'd be great if there's a way that they can upload their resume or connect with other things like LinkedIn profiles and things like that to make it as easy as possible, so that then those profiles can be matched to the profile for the positions and begin to identify those folks. It also has to provide the capability for candidates to update their information if they're, if I'm in the talent pool and I'm working in the private sector and I have some new experience or a new credential, I need to be able to easily update my profile with that information. And finally, we need to be able to search individuals within there that, what is their employment status? So if somebody says, okay, I'm now going to be dormant because I just got this new private sector job and I'm not really that interested in federal employment right now, we need to know that so that we're searching for people that are interested in federal employment. So that's kind of the third piece of this process for making it really fluid for people to be able to move in and out of the talent pool.
Okay, great. So the third task we focused on was around this clearance and eligibility piece. And I will say that some of the most interesting conversations we had, and a bit of the sticky wicket here, is how do we maintain that talent pool of cleared and eligible candidates? As many of you are aware and know, the clearance process has been talked about it, I feel like, for decades and decades here, but it is the one area in particular, especially when you have found the right individuals to fill the need, that has really hampered and prevented a lot of that work from occurring in a timely manner, and there's lots of different constraints around that as well. So instead of necessarily taking an existing process and say, how do we take what we have today, it's really more of applying flexibilities within that process as well. So the concept and the thought here is really to say that we want to have an ongoing process that allows for individuals who are within this talent pool, regardless of their particular status, whether they're active or they're dormant, to have some type of, and I'll call for a better lack of term, ongoing visibility into their clearance eligibility, meaning that during certain predefined either time frames or after certain events are triggered, that there is an ongoing maintenance of that clearance within the talent pool. That doesn't have to be a full-blown investigation, but rather pieces of that help in the process. It helps check some of those boxes while people are in the talent pool, so that when a match is made, so that when they are aligned to a particular agency job, that the agencies don't have to spend months and months going through the clearance process. So what we want to do and what we're proposing is really to push that clearance eligibility much further into the talent pool, to check a lot of those things ahead of time, and again, to expedite the entrance on duty process so that when that match is made, when that person is going to be aligned to that position at a particular agency, that truly the agencies don't have to spend all of the time and money and resources to actually go through a separate clearance process, because frankly all of that has been cleared ahead of time, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to streamline the process. We're trying to push some of these activities further into the talent pools. In many cases, these folks will be cleared, but at the same time, they're not necessarily waiting for the job. They're not waiting to start because they, frankly, might have another job that they're already working in, right? So really it's to push that further into the process to make sure that those investigations that are done in some cases are ongoing. We've also proposed some ideas that will come out in the concept about doing this on a randomized basis. But again, we want to find these folks and we want to get them somewhat fast-tracked so when there is an alignment to the job, that they truly can move right into that agency or department and begin work immediately. Okay. The next task here was around creating connectivity around multiple systems and infrastructure. So there are a lot of nuances to this process. Obviously, it has to be supported by various different types of technologies. I think I'm not going to, and for the folks that are here in the room, it's probably a bit of an eye chart. For those online, it might be a little easier to see. But as you can see, there are a lot of different systems in place here that do require connectivity as well as interoperability. We've been talking about the sourcing side with sourcing systems, the ability to create talent pools, the ability to have assessment, the ability to folks to have an easy interface, if you will, that allows them to update their profiles, to opt in and out, right? So just completely on the front end of this thing, there are, in some cases, some different systems that most likely the technologies are absolutely there today, but the interoperability probably hasn't been there yet. So in terms of what we're looking at for our ConOps is being able to bring some of these things together. As folks move into the talent pools, right, you have things like applicant tracking systems. There's clearance systems. There's this talent profile, what we're affectionately calling match.gov. There's talent management systems which align into the communities as well. We talked about workforce planning and how to leverage broad-based analytics to find these folks. And again, that is just within the talent pool itself. So we take that, and then we have to, at some point, move these folks from the talent pool into the agencies themselves, right? The agencies are posting requisitions out there. How do we bring all of those things together? So there's requisition systems. There's also entrance on duty systems that agencies and departments would have. So when you look at this from the concept around sourcing the talent, recruiting the talent into the talent pools, and then dispersing these folks into the agencies, there's a lot of connectivity. There's a lot of connected pieces that are needed to be in place in order to make this a fairly seamless process. The great news in all of this is all those disparate pieces are actually in place today. Some of these systems are already connected, but from a holistic standpoint in the way that we're approaching it, this is a new concept, but we believe that there's a good probability that a lot of the technologies that are already in place can be put together in a way that allows for this process to seamlessly work here.
We have a question actually on the prior screen. USAID is asking, have the security elements been briefed, discussed with folks on the security side, the clearance side?
Yeah, and so part of this concept of operations is really to stoke a lot of that thinking with folks on the clearance side as well. There's no magic wand here by any stretch. Obviously, we're tackling issues from a talent pool perspective that people have been banging their heads against the wall for years and years and years. We think there's efficiencies in the process that can be looked at, in particular when you have less pressure to clear individuals because their EOD date is not set yet. That actually can help expedite the process, right? There's not that pressure in some cases when somebody doesn't need to start working immediately to go through some of these expedited clearances. So our hope is with this particular concept that we can get this in the hands of folks who are part of that decision-making process. In particular, we've identified NBIB within OPM as a good starting point for some of this, as well as with the folks in the different agencies, and USAID is a great example of that as well. But we do think that at a minimum it creates a conversation piece. And then again, with the concept that we're promoting of these folks not rolling directly into full-time employment, rather into the talent pool, that it will help to expedite some of the timelines here and make it an overall an easier process for folks. Okay. The last piece here we're going to hit on, and the last area that we focused on the CONOPS was around the training and development. There's a couple different perspectives here. The one that we looked at when we were talking about the talent as a service operation is we think this can be a very lean operation. Technology in many cases can drive the efficiencies within the process. So starting more from the end user perspective, the individual who wants to be part of this talent pool, simple interfaces, simple job aids, easy to use, providing just-in-time training from video standpoint, getting these folks, quote unquote, trained and getting them up to speed is going to be much easier because people are more familiar today with applications and ease of use, right? So we're not trying to create an overly complicated application and process from the end user's perspective. So that's one thing there. The other side of it is the operational side, and so if you look at it, we had proposed, the talent as a service, PMO. We also think this is a pretty lean operation as well. Yes, there are some competencies and abilities of folks who are within that PMO that they'll have to understand, but for the most part, the process does not need to be run by a very large organization. It can be very lean and agile. It also, the areas around how this thing works and how to maintain this and how do we engage within the talent pool. A lot of these concepts that we've put out there are self-sustaining concepts. They don't require a lot of moderation. They don't require a lot of hand-holding from the offices that are running this as well. So overall, we don't think there's a very high need for rigorous training and development. Rather, it's about bringing some of these unique subject matter expertise into a process that has the flexibility to run this stuff. And frankly, we think that folks who are potential candidates for this could get into the process and could maintain their talent status just by having a familiarity with a lot of the applications that are already out there today. So ease of use, both from an end-use perspective and well as a very lean operation from a CONOPS and from a PMO standpoint as well. So we covered these 5 tasks within our concept of operations. The goal for us, and as I said earlier, is to get this released hopefully by June 29th. That's our target date, but sometimes these things slip a little bit. But we will have the paper forthcoming. We're really excited about the momentum that this is generating. And again, I feel like we've been talking talking about this for some years now. But there is a lot of excitement, right? And I think, probably to Ken's point earlier, out-of-the-box thinking is being encouraged right now. And when you have existing flexibilities within government that can be tweaked and leveraged, when there's a desire to make some of these things happen, when there's kind of a will behind doing some of these things, then we see no reason why certain aspects of this can't move forward. So our hope and goal is to have OPM be able to take this information to run with it and do good with it as well. So that is kind of the overview of the concept of operations paper. I think at this point we'll just kind of open it up to questions and here in the room as well as folks on the phone as well. So just wanted to say before we do that, certainly thank you very much for your interest in this particular topic, and we're happy to hopefully answer your questions here.
For those of you on the line, please send your questions in through the chat box, and we will read them here as I'm about to do one here. Let's see. This is Ken Munson again at OPM. We've not talked about federal vernacular today.
Speak up a little bit.
This is coming from Ken Munson at OPM. We've not talked about federal vernacular today. Do we see that as a barrier? Would overcoming it be an enabler? Is the question clear?
I think I know where he's going with that, and I think that
could you amplify that as well as Dave's going to?
Yeah. So vernacular from a federal standpoint can be very confusing, in particular with individuals who are not familiar at all with some of the nuances of the federal environment, let alone federal employment. When we're trying to push this concept to individuals that truly do not understand, they know they're interested in cyber as an example. They're technically astute. They may want to give back to the government. They may want to give back to the country. They may want to pursue public servitude, if you will. They don't know the first thing about what that actually means. They see terms and concepts that are probably confusing to them. So I think where this question is going is we have to make this user-friendly. And I think when you are talking about targeting and sourcing individuals who have never considered this type of employment before, you've got to make this easy to understand. You have to make it usable. You have to create terms and concepts that frankly appeal to people that have never considered these concepts before, right? So when I think about federal vernacular, I think in some cases of the confusion that might create in the processes, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to create, we're trying to attract folks to something that they've not considered before, and we need to make it user-friendly. So I don't know, Jennifer and Jody, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and I think to that point is, how do we retranslate what we're talking about, especially for personal interest. So, for instance, my son is in 5th grade. He doesn't say, I want to work for a federal government agency. He says, I want to be a police officer. So how do we translate, law enforcement and what the possibilities are in the federal government? So I think that's our challenge. But, yeah, we definitely get caught up in our Beltway speak. That doesn't make sense to anyone else. So we have to recognize the limitations, but be able to do a crosswalk into what that means for the average person.
Yeah.
Really interesting slides and conversation and everything. I wanted to ask a follow-up question about the talent pool, because it looks like, that's really the cadre of the database of the passive job seekers and stuff like that. And I know there's going to be some responsibility on the job seeker as the individual to update their profile and stuff.
Absolutely.
There's also going to be a responsibility of a recruiter, resource manager, someone to ping them because it's just an email or something. People aren't going to necessarily do that, and people's life circumstances or things change with that. How do you see that break up between, the responsibility of keeping that talent pool active in
Yeah.
living, farming, and working it? Like, what's the responsibility on the individual? What's the responsibility on the task type system or PMO, and kind of expand on that?
Yeah, so actually that's one of the juggernauts of this whole thing, right? So hopefully with big data, analytics, and so forth, I think there are two things to this answer. One is that I think one of the beauties of this is you can identify for something they may not have considered. So versus having to look at USA Jobs and think, I'm a good fit for this, it is someone exactly you're saying, hey, I see that you have very transferable skills. I think you'd be a good fit for this. So that's, I think, on the organization. On the individual, it is incumbent upon them to demonstrate activity and a level of interest. So it's something we didn't quite get into yet, although we had a lot of good conversations about it, is, could there be things like a learning environment where, while you're waiting for something, I want to build my skills and take a certification or some courses on certain skills. Is there a community of practice where people can engage and demonstrate their expertise? Is that something that both the pools and the agencies can participate in? So an agency can throw a question out there, see what responses they get, and say, hey, I really like Jody Simcoe, gave a really smart answer. By the way, is she available? So I think it is incumbent, because keeping this system, this is not an evergreen system, so I think keeping, rolling people out, gauging some level of activity and interest and their eligibility is one of the challenges, but I think really one of the opportunities of this.
I think when you will ask folks who are in technical roles, whether they're in government or private sector, you ask those individuals, what do you want out of your work environment? What do you want out of your job? Most people will say collaboration, because that's how technical things get done today. They get done, and if you think about the concept of agile development or DevOps or those types of things, you really have a lot of cross-collaboration that's going on. So although this is not necessarily a work environment, I believe that, and going back to kind of some of the initial concepts that we kicked around in our executive report in phase 1, it's creating an environment of collaboration, right? And the community aspect was one that we focused on. We didn't delve into it a lot in the ConOps because, frankly, we didn't have the time to do it. But creating those communities of interest that allow for that cross-collaboration of like-minded individuals, and that can take a lot of quote-unquote virtual shapes and forms, that it can include training and development as well. But we think just having those folks associated with one another at a minimum will go a long way into helping keep that interest within the community, frankly, whether somebody has opted into that talent pool or not. If any other ideas as well, I mean, by no stretch of the imagination have we thought of everything, but at a minimum, I think that creates an environment of continuous learning and can be very positive for folks participating in that.
We're going to open the line up and ask Ms. Hill from USAID to take the line.
Hi.
Hello. We can hear you.
Okay. So my question is on being involved with the Open Opportunity Forum, where people are basically putting their names in. There's if you have a opportunity, you need some help in certain things, you put your name in and you get connected with helping provide a task based on your talents, etc. So they're actually doing this currently, and it sounds like it could be a place for collaboration in being able to see how that they've gotten their talent pool and how it's matched up with the individual organizations that need them. So if I needed a contracting officer for 4 weeks to help me do such and such, then I just put in, what I need, and then they do a match thing.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. And the good news is that we see this concept not only in terms of what we've proposed, but this concept's actually out there today with a lot of different agencies. I mean, I know from a intelligence community standpoint, there are these concepts out there about having some of these, I'll call them reserve corps. The DOD does this right now. If you think about a reservist, DHS does this with FEMA when their cadre of on-call emergency responders as well. A lot of these folks have day jobs, right? They have private sector employment, and when they are quote unquote called up, or when that particular need is identified, then those individuals go into some type of service for some set period of time. So that, in some ways, is a bit of the genesis for what we're doing here. The big difference being that has holistically not been done across government, right? And so the individual agencies and departments have had some of these flexibilities to pull in those part-time or temporary resources or those cadres of on-call personnel into the organization on an as-needed basis. But when you look across all of government, it really has not been done as a whole, right? So what we're trying to do here, at least with our concept, is open this up to everybody to create these larger talent pools of individuals. And then once those individuals are cleared and the matches are there, then the agencies and departments can pull from that particular resource pool as well. So we've taken a lot of these little concepts that are happening on a one-off basis and said, all right, how can we make this really, really big? So agree with everything you've said, and hopefully, that helps clarify a few things as well.
Dave, I've got 3 questions. First, I'll start out. This looks really great. Looks very well thought out, as I expected you would, and the team would provide us.
Yeah.
First question is one that Deb Tomczyk would be asking were she here, because she has brought it up. The concept of government-wide talent pool is actually where government hiring started. You applied to work for the federal government,
correct,
and then you got matched up with individual opportunities. And then it has gone away from that. In your research to get to this, what did you hear on why they went away from that, and why do you think that they would be more inclined to come back to that now?
Yeah. So we're kind of going back to the future, right? In some ways. So you're absolutely right, and I think that when if you look at how federal employment occurred for decades and decades and decades, it was to come into the federal government, right? And then that would be from a centralized standpoint, and then you would go out to the various different departments and agencies. Based on my conversations with folks, especially those who've been in the public sector for a long period of time and working with individual departments and agencies, I think what you had over the past several decades is a real push from those agencies and departments to say, hey, we're unique, we're different, we need to have a different process, we need to hire for different occupations, let us take control over that hiring and recruiting process, and we'll own it. So OPM, you don't need to own that, but we'll own that, right? And so you've seen in some cases the decentralization of that hiring, recruiting, and training, right? So we push this thing further out. I think what has happened in some cases is that decentralization also has caused lag in the system, right? Some agencies, frankly, don't do this really well. Some do it very, very well. So there's a disparity between how these processes are managed as well. At the same time, these agencies have required, using clearance as an example, a centralized resource in many cases to help them in their hiring process. So they own the process, but they're hamstrung in some cases by this hybrid model that requires, I need to get some information before this person can actually become employed in my agency. With the advent of technology, with better processes, with more efficient use of resources in a much more streamlined manner, I think we have kind of come back to the future again, where we think at least with this concept, it can be a centralized model. The agencies still own their people, right? At some point, these folks still go to the agencies. They're still doing mission work. But the agencies, in some cases, their focus is a little bit different. Maybe I don't need to put all these recruiting resources and all these things in place at the agency level because that talent has already been cleared from a pool perspective. So truly, when I bring somebody in day one to my agency, that person can start immediately. And my focus becomes more of talent development and training and making sure that individual gets up to speed versus waiting 3, 6, 9 months for that person to come on board cleared. So to Deb's question, to your question, Bob, I think with the nature of where we are today and that evolution, that some of these concepts could be re-centralized and we can pull back in some of the inefficiencies that are happening at the department and agency level into more of the centralized model. And I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that or not.
No.
My second and third questions sort of merge around your answer. I wanted you to talk a little bit about how this would work from an agency or department's perspective. Listening to what you were just saying, I think there are going to be a number of, and maybe even the majority of positions will fall into sort of generic, like cybersecurity analyst. A cybersecurity analyst working for this agency isn't doing that much different than a cybersecurity analyst over there. But there will be specific cases where agencies need specific talent. I mean, the FDA needs drug clearance people that nobody else does. NASA needs astronauts, nobody else needs them. And there's certain branding opportunities around specific agencies for specific missions. How do you see, let's just pick one. Let's pick FEMA, for example, or pick USAID, they're on the phone.
Yes.
How do you see a specific organization, if this were to roll out into place the way that you want to see it go, will they be taking everybody from the talent pool and not doing that? Would they be doing specific things? How do you see it from the position of somebody sitting in human capital in the agency?
Yeah, I'll just throw out a couple and then you guys can add on, because I think that's a really important question. I meant to mention this in my response, but I think the talent pool gets us people that, you know, could serve in many of these roles. But when a job opening occurs, I think really the agency, like, so we talked about having a government-wide competencies, right? But each agency may have, obviously, a tailored model. So I need this knowledge, and I need this as well. So I think when it comes to the final match, agencies will then kind of take a look at the talent pool and select some potential people, but also add those additional competencies or knowledge or skills to the profile so that they can make sure they're getting that piece of it as well. So I think it gets you the general cybersecurity skills, but I think there is some matching with an agency that will have some tailoring in terms of what they're looking for.
And I think this goes to what we talked about. This is a supplement. This is not a replacement. So there will be those positions. If NASA's going to be able to have a certain retirement. This is for the skills that aren't specific to the mission of the agency.
Other questions online? We now have the phones unmuted, so if you would like to address your question verbally, please speak up.
Yeah, good morning, team. This is Ken Munson from OPM. Thanks, everybody, for joining and for allowing me to ask some questions and throw some thoughts out. Listen, I'm a former private sector person. I was a Fed, went to the private sector for 25 years, and then came back to the Fed to work at OPM. And one of the things I'm curious about in the talent as a service world is what is industry doing to mobilize their talent, to potentially create candidate pools like this, right? I mean, I managed teams for a number of years, always had to deal with what did my bench look like, what was my bench strength, what are my utilization rates, and looking for ways to get people some valuable experience. And I think there might be a win-win here for industry to say, hey, we have available talent to put on some of these temporary assignments. How do we put together a pool of industry folks that could be brought to bear on some of these tasks for the federal government?
So I think one is expanding the IPA, and there's challenges with that. We do some of that at MITRE, but then there's some challenges that once you go in and you serve the work, you can't contract the work back to the organization. But that's the immediate model, and I think there are a lot of organizations, and I think it would behoove both organizations as well as the individuals to have these tours of duties and develop skills and relationships. Now, of course, you'd want to put some straitjackets on that, so you're not inviting a lot of bad faith that could happen with something like that. But I think there are some constructs, and I think private sector would be interested in things like this. I mean, we see that as a good thing when MITRE executives serve the government directly.
Yeah, I think really back to what's the business case for the private sector to want to be part of this? Like you said, maybe they have people that they don't have enough work for people. These are great people, and they said, let's see you for 6 months, or other reasons for the good of the world, but
the individual,
right, and the individual. So, but I think having those messages and partnering with the private sector is a very big part of it.
Yeah, and I look at it in some ways in terms of reciprocating value. So as in a private sector employer, I am more willing to let my employees provide some type of service to government, and you can use, being a reservist as a perfect example. A lot of private sector organizations, we're pretty proud of those individuals that that go back and provide that type of service to the country. And the private workplace provides those flexibilities so those individuals can come right back into the job that they left. The reciprocating relationship piece is that as a private sector employer, I know that individual could learn new skills, could be associated with some different things. They're gonna gain experience. And you know what? I might keep their job for them. I'm okay when they might move out of my employment into a federal employment because I know that they're going to come back having learned something new. So for me, that is a reciprocal relationship that I'm always interested in my employees growing. From an employee standpoint, there's a lot of flexibilities and benefits here that I'm learning and growing my own knowledge. I'm growing my own value, frankly. I'm growing my own net worth. I'm able to contribute to the missions. And by the way, I can do this both on the public and the private sector side at the same time. So I think there's some strings here that probably can be pulled on that would make it interesting for private sector to be able to promote this as well, to end up helping us push people in some ways into this concept of being part of the talent pool, but at the same time, they're not losing their employees, right? They're still there. It's something that helps the employees, it helps government as well. So I view it in some ways as a two-way street, and I think that if you can get the private sector buy-in to something like this, where they're not necessarily concerned they're going to lose their talent, then it's going to be a win-win for everyone.
And just to that, in addition to the private sector, I think it's important to look at nonprofit organizations and academia, and that reduces the conflict of interest.
Great. So I appreciate you guys indulging that question. From a federal government perspective, you guys are the low-hanging fruit for us for a pool, right? So we need to look at maybe are there things in policy, are there rules that need to be changed, are there acquisition rules that are getting in the way of doing that kind of thing. So again, thanks for indulging the question. I just wanted to spark the conversation. Again, we weren't drawing a box around ourselves. Let's think outside some things we can do differently.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Ken.
Any other questions from the phone? Dave, I had one other question that I think a number of people probably have. Report comes out end of the month, soon after. You've talked about potential for a pilot. Are there anything in the works that we can see as expected next steps? Is the pilot something that could happen, or is the pilot something that is likely to happen, or are there any things that we can look to as likely?
Well, none of us can predict the future. Having said that, there's a lot of momentum around this topic right now. So we're hearing interest, in particular from OPM, from the top levels down. Obviously, we've got folks on the phone right now who have a vested interest in this particular concept. There's also some associations out there as well that we've got some interest, different subject matter experts around government as well. We've yet to come across somebody who said, this is not a good idea.
Right.
We come across people that say, we think this can happen. We think there's a will today to make this happen. Give us a construct, give us a framework that we can run with right now. So that's what we're banking on. Will a pilot happen? We hope so. Will this be taken and used for good? We certainly hope so. From our standpoint, government and industry has come together and proposed something that we think is tangible and can work, right? So I think from that ACT-IAC standpoint, we're very happy where this has come. But now it needs to be handed off. It needs to be put in the hands of folks who can take it and run with it. And we think, based on everything that we're hearing, that the right people will have visibility into this. And so our fingers are crossed, but you know.
Can you be more specific than that? You said OPM. Who else is, you talked about excitement and momentum and things like that. Who else besides OPM?
Yeah, I think a lot of the agencies that we talk to are interested in this concept.
You've already talked to agencies about this?
Yeah, so
as ACT-IAC, I'm trying to get a clarity between the actual group and ACT-IAC's role in this.
Yeah, the concept has generated interest for some time now. Being able to pull those cadres, being able to pull those people into this construct, where it hasn't gone forward is the lack of understanding in how to make this happen. So we think that with the flexibilities that at least we've identified both from a policy as well as from a funding standpoint, we feel that the mechanisms are in place today, right? But really the promotion of this right now, the championing of this particular concept, what we're seeing is probably most of that momentum is within OPM right now. There is a lot of desire to make some changes, and we continue to see that. So it's exciting for them. It's exciting, I think, in some cases for the different departments that have expressed some interest in this. They're going to wait for guidance. Frankly, this isn't something that a department would do on their own. In some ways, it does need to come from the top down. But yeah, I think we're hearing the excitement. We're hearing, hey, this is a great idea. When can we get the framework for this? When can we take this concept and move it forward?
So my feedback and some questions to this. There's been a lot of great work that's been done on this. There was a term used on some of the inquiries here about security and vernacular. For IAC to actually publish this, we do need to lay some things on top of this, maybe not a lot, that do have to do with security, PII, referencing things like that are not part of this, that are government either mandates laws, policies, some of it's OPMs that would need to be changed. We need to address those so that we're not just talking about a commercial thing that wouldn't work within the federal government as it's currently stated. So that's why I've been asking some of these questions. IAC has to represent this, not just the group's excitement around it. I think there's a movement afoot for DOD to actually take the clearance process away from OPM. And so there's clearance and then there's background checks. So there's technically two different things. So we need to really look into that a little more thoroughly so that we don't confuse the two together. Otherwise, you've referenced a lot of the things that are in place. Maybe they can move around a little bit, but the concept is there. It could be just agencies themselves doing this on their own because we need to make sure that this is independent of the current hiring process, because you would create a massive bottleneck if you pushed the hiring process as it currently stands through this pipe versus having it being a supplemental cyber or any other requirement, other position within that pool. Jobs aren't assigned to the people that are applying. You understand what I'm saying? There's a massive amount of people that are applying to specific jobs, and so if you push them into the pool first, have them be accepted or not, that process is what systems currently in place are handling. OPM's version, our company's version, other companies' versions.
Right.
So I think the concept of it being supplemental could be awesome.
Yeah, agreed. And that is exactly what this model is around. It is creating that supplemental talent pool of resources of folks who perhaps have never considered federal employment before. It doesn't circumvent what an existing department or agency is doing from a hiring standpoint, right? That's not what this concept was around. Rather, I think it's a complement to that particular process. It provides an additional resource for those, the same way that a private sector organization would create their own pool of resources as well for their potential employment. We're just taking that construct and throwing it in from a federal standpoint as well. So, agree. It would be crazy to make this the federal hiring process, right?
I don't want to take that on.
That's not what this is.
Not what we signed up for.
Yeah. No. But we do think that this concept has merit. We do think that, again, from the momentum from what we're hearing from folks, that there is a good amount of excitement with it. So we're certainly excited to hand this off to the right folks and let them run with it as they see fit.
Well, Dave, Ann, Jennifer, and Jody, thank you very much. This has been an excellent presentation based on an excellent body of work. This is great, and I look forward to seeing it come to being published very soon. And thank all of you, both in the room and online, for participating today. And this concludes this particular month's meeting, and we look forward to seeing you online and on the phone in July. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.